Really excited to be here today. We were just talking backstage that apparently we have hot competition for the 2 p.m. slot here today because Justin Trudeau is speaking in another room. But we've fought well, and I'm really happy to see you all here today. And I hope none of you sort of squeeze out the back door when you've just heard that news. But thank you for joining me. And a really exciting panel. So what we're going to discuss here today is AI for ASEAN, because there's a lot of hope and hype around what AI can do for companies, countries, and regions. And we want to get to the bottom of what that means for the ASEAN region. And it potentially can do a lot. I did some research not too long ago, which tried to calculate the economic impact of artificial intelligence on countries. And so depending on government policy and how supportive they are of AI, that can have a real impact on a country's GDP. So the findings from these research found that in developing Asian region, out to 2030, if government is playing a positive role in terms of supporting AI, that can boost GDP by over 2%. So big number, over 2%. And if they don't have a positive role in supporting AI, then it can decline by almost 1%. So really large numbers. So government policy has a massive impact here on how it can support business. So let's just get to the bottom of this and what this means for individual companies. And we've got a great panel here of people who vary from airline industries to the banking sector to government innovation areas of business, and also startups from SEB Abacus. So let's get to the bottom of this just by understanding. We'll go one by one to understand, what does AI mean for you?
Well, for Singapore Airlines, we see AI having two high-level themes. One, obviously, is revenue generation through more relevance of offers and better service. And secondly, cost reduction through efficiency. The actual manifestations of those will be in areas such as facial recognition for lounge access so people don't need to queue, being able to do better hiring and promotion of people based on the attributes that are demonstrated to correlate with customer satisfaction and acceptable service. There are many applications beyond the customer-facing side, including predictive maintenance of aircraft and improved reliability. But really, for a company like Singapore Airlines, AI is in the background. We are renowned, and Asia is renowned for a service culture. And so our application of AI is very much to free up our staff from the mundane activities so that they can be that human contact, that emotive link between the company and the customer.
We hear that quite a lot, that AI is there to take away and automate many of those repetitive processes that many of your staff are having to sort of work with and do these days. And it's going to free them up to do, hopefully, more interesting things in the future. And I think this is particularly prevalent in the banking sector as well. Sam, maybe you can give us some insight into AI at OCBC.
Yes, thank you, Charles, and good to be here. You see, banks have traditionally been an organization that collects a lot of data. A lot of data for our customers, a lot of data of the interaction with the customers, and a lot of transactions data. With that data, we do our analysis and try to unearth additional value out of it. With AI, we can explore the value much more than before. And we marry that along with the market data that we're able to access, with the big data outside, we will be able to find those information which is already in our franchise of which we do not know of. So we address it both from a revenue perspective and a cost perspective. On the revenue perspective, we start to understand the behavior, we start to understand the expected behavior of our customers, so then we can do what in the banking industry we call it, and in OCBC we call it next best action, which is the effort that we made to the customer to make sure that we entice the customer's interest in something that they may not know they will need. And we know, because we analyze the data, we combine the data with the external data, and we unearth additional opportunities that we can do. On the internal side, we also use AI to help us do certain things which are quite mundane, but also quite complex. As many of you will know, in the banking industry, we have to make sure that there is no money laundering that happens within our accounts so that we protect the financial system in Singapore. On the other hand, to monitor money laundering is quite complex because it is through the transactions behavior that we are able to identify those irregularities. It is not only look at the behavior, we also have to compare the behavior vis-a-vis what they used to do vis-a-vis now. When they opened the account, they told us something, and afterwards they used the account in a different manner. Those are the behavioral things that we do. These are what we call pattern identification, and AI is very useful in that respect. So ultimately, I think AI is going to increase what I call the franchise value of banks. You see, banks, if we are quoted, you have this price to book. Book is your net worth on the balance sheet. But when some people look at your value, they usually will pay more than the book. And that part which is more than the book is what we call the franchise value. Not in your balance sheet, but you'll be able to make active use of it. That includes the fact that if you use more AI to explore your data, you can actually create more value beyond what is already in the balance sheet.
That's some really interesting examples. And now you've both talked about largely the business benefits of artificial intelligence, the benefits it can have in terms of customer experience as well. But this goes beyond that. There's also very much a wellness benefit which can come out of AI. And Steve, we were talking about this briefly before backstage. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on how AI goes beyond just those business benefits and can really impact and help us as individuals.
Okay, so just to frame briefly, the team that I'm a member of called SGInnovate exists entirely to help the scientist entrepreneur bring something to reality. So whatever he or she has been researching, we want to help them turn that into a product, into a company, so that we can go on to positively affect, we hope, millions of people. We try to do that from Singapore with ASEAN and beyond. So in a nutshell, a lot of the work right now in AI, as many of you may know, relates to the pattern recognition, image detection, but the applications would be in healthcare. So there was just a meeting this morning at NUH talking about what might be possible in new areas to better diagnose earlier, more accurately, and in markets that don't have lots of radiologists using artificial intelligence. You want to think about autonomous vehicles and the importance of being able to see what's in front of you in order to improve safety. So we think that there's tremendous number of use cases for AI, but I'd like to also respond to the question asked earlier, what does it mean? When we think about AI, at least from our vantage point, we're AI optimists. We think it will make an important contribution, but we think there are areas to be considered. We think about the areas that include the inevitable job disruption, the social implications, but we think that those are also chances to reflect and chances to think about what might be a new way to look at how we relate to each other.
Excellent, thank you, Steve. Now we've heard a couple of corporate views on the potential of AI, and we've got Steve's interesting view from a government perspective. Now probably our only fintech representative on the panel, Sutapa. Maybe you can give us your view.
Also, I would like to introduce the company. We are fully dedicated to AI technologies, and so it means everything to us, if we put it that way. SCB Abacus is a AI-powered fintech spin-off by Siam Commercial Bank. Our mission is to build a financial service platform that promotes financial inclusion through strategic partners. And what it means is we become an open architecture to which all our partners can be taking advantage of the informations and taking advantage of this platform to offer service. And just to say, a few of our products that have been launched recently is, the first one is the fully digital lending platform that we offer instant loans to small SMEs. These small SMEs did not have access to finance before, and if they do, they got the expensive loan through personal financing. So with the technology, we allow them to be able to access SME lending, which is cheaper. a few other products are the robo-advising chatbots for wealth management, and also the money-saving mobile app that we just recently launched for university students and for digital natives. So get back to the questions of how AI help the business or how AI would affect the consumers. We definitely use AI throughout all components of our platform, obviously starting from facial recognition or the identities technologies, all the way to authentication, how to ensure the proper authorizations is being enforced, and all the way towards the fraud management and risk management, loan monitoring. So AI has enabled this platform all the way throughout. But more so for a consumer, I think AI these days, the real benefit of AI that give the leap to the economy is they allow the kind of service offering cross industries that did not happen before. So we will be able to combine our effort with retailers. We will be able to combine our effort with telecom companies and also many others, that are in negotiation right now to join the platform. And I think that's the real power of AI for consumer.
Excellent. I just want to touch on one of the points you made about creating new lending products for SMEs. And so this is, in my view, one of those real opportunities with AI, which allows us to sort of increase our customer base, tap in to that untapped market, which is not normally being serviced at the moment. And there's a large opportunity in ASEAN for this. I mean, arguably the gateway for most of these services and most of this sort of benefit for consumers is through smartphones. And smartphone penetration, although it is very, very high here in Singapore, in other parts of the ASEAN region, it is not. And there's still a lot of room to grow in other parts of the region. So let's maybe just understand about AI and how that is helping you to sort of tap into those untapped markets. I might start with you, Samuel, because financial inclusion is an obvious area to start with on this.
Financial inclusion is a very important part of the drive of AI. I would describe it in the following ways. You see, when we do the banking business, we have a target segment in mind. And people who are outside of the target segment, we typically do not target because they don't appeal to us. They don't appeal to us could be for different reasons. For geographical reasons, we cannot reach them. For cost reasons, because we have to build a branch network to reach them. Also for credit standing reasons, maybe they don't have a good credit history. We cannot reach them. But with digitalization plus AI, we take a totally different view on them. In a way, we are no longer looking at them as individual customers. We are looking at them as a portfolio of customers. By virtue of looking at them as a portfolio of customers, we realize that the cost factor that we originally was stopping us from doing it becomes less important because we are able to do a lot of things with them without the infrastructure build that is physically possible. On the other hand, we are also no longer looking at them as an individual customer because as a portfolio, they will be appealing to us because previously we may be concerned about the credit and their repayment ability, but as a portfolio, we know that there are more customers who are able and willing to repay than those who are not and unwilling to repay. In that case, we combine them into what we call a portfolio. Of course, we never tell the customer that you are a portfolio customer. You are not an individual. But practically speaking, from a portfolio perspective, it will make it work. And this is only possible with digitalization as the technology and with AI as the tool. Because with AI as a tool, we can research into many other behaviors of which we can at least test their willingness to repay. And plus some hard facts on the ability to repay, we combine the two, we'll be able to reach out to them. So I envisage that ultimately AI is able to bring society more inclusive. We'll be able to allow them to communicate with each other, also allow us to communicate with them in a way that previously was prohibitive for reach reasons, outreach reasons, and for cost reasons. But now we don't have to do that because we're looking at them as a component of the portfolio. And this is not to belittle them at all. It's just from a practical perspective, we're looking at them in that way.
What really strikes me from what you've been saying is that obviously you're tapping into this untapped market, and a lot of this is down through new AI techniques and automation, and there's less and less people involved within this process, which as you were saying that, a question popped up on Pigeonhole here, so I encourage you to ask some questions. There is a system, I think it operates through the app, that you can ask some questions of the panel, but one question has just popped up here, and apparently if I press this I can stick it up on the screen, but the question is, with AI becoming predominant, will banking continue to be an attractive profession, remuneration-wise, going forward? Will banking continue, will be a commoditized type of profession, which we get paid less, valued less, because of a lot of this technology that we're talking about now? Slightly controversial question. Are you happy for me to throw that out to you, Sam, to answer that one?
Banking will continue to be attractive as a career. Because ultimately you have to realize that it's a people-to-people business. You need people to understand the people's needs, but through technology to reach out to them. It is not that you use the technology to reach out to them and that's it. You still have to have the human intelligence, augmented by artificial intelligence, augmented by digitalization, so that you'll be able to reach out to them to fulfill their needs. I do not think all of their needs will be able to be satisfied by doing a mechanical analysis without the human brain involved in it. So it is still very much required. And I always think, whatever we do on the technology side, there will be no role elimination per se. What you used to know will still be applicable, but now you need to combine what you used to know to another thing that you do not know. You combine it to perform your new role. So people is still the most important element in the banking business.
Steve, I saw you twitchy over there.
Go ahead.
So Steve,
I think I agree and I disagree. I think every industry is going to have the inevitable impact of artificial intelligence, and I agree with the point that Sam's making, which is people to people. People want to relate to other human beings. That was part of what I was referring to when I said, how do we relate to each other? But just as there are fewer tellers standing behind desks in the way that there were more branches, now there's going to be more and more automation and more tools, not just in banking, but in every industry. And so I agree that understanding how to relate to other people will be a very critical skill. But at the same time, there will also be fewer roles in every industry for things that are automatable. So I think one of the important things for us to be talking about and honest about is there will be job displacement, there will be an impact on education, because now people won't learn a job as much as they'll need to learn a portfolio of skills. So I think part of what will happen is every industry will have high-value, empathetic, people-related roles, and every industry will also have some roles that are eliminated and some that are changed. And I think there's several categories. So I think it's important in these discussions to always talk about that reality, because we see it every day in the startups with whom we're working that are trying to make that happen. 10 people going to 3 is a reality, but it also means the 7 have other opportunities. So I think we should discuss that.
I think I distinguish between a job and a role. The future job will require more than the role that the person was originally performing. You need to have more knowledge. So the roles are consolidated into one, but the 2 roles consolidate into one, and the job becomes you need to do a consolidated role. But the basic skills, basic knowledge of that role is still there. And you need to perform that role by having additional knowledge added into you to perform that role. Along the way, of course, there will be new roles that will be created, which will be able to absorb the people that may not want to perform that additional combined role to move on to another role. Take a teller job, for example. Tellers are not there, but the teller role is still there. The teller role of dispensing the cash is now done through a machine, but the teller role is still there. So who will be the person who will be able to help to tell the customer that this is the way that you can get the cash from? It is still the teller role, but the teller now also has to perform the additional role, which we call them digital ambassadors. So the teller has been converted to a different role, of which you say, if it is only you want to get cash, you go to this machine. However, other things I will still serve you, such as you wanted to find out whether you will be able to do a remittance, then we say, yes, you'll be able to do a remittance. Previously, it was done by the teller. We now say that you can do it with me, or you can do it through the online channel, and we teach you how to do the online channel. So the teller now is performing a digital ambassador role, which combines all of the roles that he or she used to play. So I don't want to create a fear factor in you that the jobs will be eliminated. The roles will be combined, but there will be additional requirements for those people who have that basic knowledge to evolve themselves to become a more customer-oriented performance role so that they'll be able to bring the customers onto that newer channel.
I would agree with both of you. I did some research not too long ago which found that something like 90% of the tasks of the finance function are going to get automated away in the future. But this research found that this was actually a positive thing because it would free finance function up to do other more interesting things. And one of the interesting things it would allow them to do was to take the skill set they've developed in terms of automating their own functions in their own department and share that with the rest of the organization and take more of a sort of a digital transformation lead in the rest of the business. So quite an interesting sort of dual multifunctional role that they would have in the future. But Campbell, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think this whole fear of dislocation of jobs as a consequence of AI is very real, and Steve hits a relevant point. But this is not the first time we've been through such things. 20 years ago, aircraft used to be flown by 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and a navigator. Now it's 2. Yet there's a worldwide shortage of pilots at the moment. The number of people flying internationally is 3 times larger now than it was when I joined the industry 22 years ago. It's not as if changing roles means there are no more roles. It just means that they evolve.
Excellent. Yes, Sutapa.
I just want to add something along the line of other speakers, is that a lot of the questions that asked today are human questions. AI just help answer that or validate that. So that role would never be eliminated, at least with the state of artificial intelligence today. So it would be mostly asked by people who know the business, people who understand the data that give you the right view of a customers. So I don't think that role will be taken. Having that said, whether banking service will be offered by the same players or not, that's another story. And I would like to say that what we see today in the US and in China is the trend where companies with power to obtain data and power to obtain talent, technical talents, will be the one that accumulates market power. And with that, I see the same trend is being replicated here in ASEAN. So I think it's really up to the regulation and definitely consumer advocacy groups to make sure that that power, that market power, is not abused. And that power is being shared among customers who are actually the real owner of the data.
Excellent. So people is obviously one of the challenges that we need to try and address if we're going to get the most out of AI across ASEAN. Another challenge is around data and data flows. And if you're in the earlier sessions here today, both Christine Lagarde and Narendra Modi both spoke about data flows, and that is one of the key challenges that we need to try and solve if we're going to get the most out of fintech across the region, but AI in particular, as we're talking about here today. Interestingly, I think neither of them actually came up with a solution. They just raised it as a challenge. Maybe we'll get a little bit closer to that here on our panel today. Sutapa, I'm going to start with you around data, because I know it's very close to your company's heart.
It's the heart. it's not close to the heart, it's the heart. I would like to, there's so many challenges, obviously, and because the market's very new, but I would like to highlight 3 challenges mainly. The first one is definitely navigating through uncertainty regulatory environment. As we see here, GDPR came out in May. It certainly has some ripple effect to even other companies outside of the EU. We're still yet to see there's some issues that still debatable whether it can be solved. With technology, for example, the right to be explained, the right to be forgotten. What would you do to be forgotten if you're in part of the blockchain? There's a lot of ways that can't be done through that law, and navigating through this uncertainty is it's never good for any stakeholders, including the customers. The second challenge I would like to point out is to walk the fine line between data privacy, customer privacy, and innovation. And I think that's go down not just in the national level, in the national legislation level, but also at the firm level. I think every firm, I hope you would agree that we have to make that call every day, certainly within the law, but even that we need to still walk the fine line. And the third challenge that I would like to mention here is we still need to educate the public a lot on the AI technology itself, the fear factor that Samuel mentioned early on, and also educating about data privacy. I understand that most of the people, I'm sure not in this room, but outside, they don't really read the consent form that well. And that's for a reason. And it's not so much because the firm decide to make, legalese instead of human language. We are abide by law to write, a very complex, very incomprehensible language for customers to sign. And that does not instill trust at all. So I think that needs to be changed, that needs to be addressed.
Any of my panelists want to add to the data discussion? It can get hotly contested. I was moderating a panel on Monday, which was talking about some research we'd done for Austrade and Westpac, and it got quite hotly debated over sort of data sovereignty and this idea that countries would start using data as a national resource, and they would button down the hatches and close the borders to any flows of data because it'd be so valuable to them as a country in the future. Some of the other panelists disagreed that if you were to do that, then you are going to ruin the opportunities around innovation and the overall, the ultimate benefit to consumers and people. Anybody want to add to that?
Only to concur. That all of us, whether we're governments, whether we're individuals, whether we're companies, we all think that our data set is particularly valuable. But we often lose sight of the fact that it is only one slice of us, or only one slice of the world, and it really has value when it is interspersed with other data sets. Now, how to do that in a way that respects legal concerns, that respects personal privacy concerns, is the challenge, and there are platforms that are coming up to allow that to happen. But data is overvalued in micro, and we need to find a way to release that value by allowing it to spread further.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if I may just add my comment to this. It's a controversial subject, but I would prefer that the data privacy protection be principle-based rather than rule-based. And I think currently it is so much rule-based. I would like to see a world where ultimately you are required to follow the principle. If somebody abused the data, then you go harshly against them or make it even criminal if you abuse the data. If you are rule-based, I think there are still a lot of gaps. For example, at the current environment, if we obtain an individual's consent to share the data with another institution, it is considered allowed and within the allowance of the PDPA. However, did you ask the question, when the customer gives you the consent, does the customer really understand what does that consent mean? What is the data that has been released to another entity is going to be used for? I doubt the customer truly understands 100% of what the intention was when he agreed to release the data to another institution and when another institution utilized that data. So this is the issue with respect to rule-based, because consent obtained, then you can actually go ahead. I think we ultimately should move on to more principle-based, which therefore is you have to follow the principle. If you don't, then you could be violating. It's more cumbersome, administratively more burdenful, but I think ultimately it's going to benefit the community, to society, by allowing the data to be used in a positive manner so that you do not disallow certain information flow to them to entice and create an interest of which they are not even aware of.
Excellent. I'm just going to, Steve, if you want to say something else, I was going to jump to one of our questions. Excellent. We've got a question which just supports what you're talking about here, Sam, which talks about data exchanges and saying that the challenge of AI is getting the right data in for model training. do you foresee an opportunity of data sales, data exchanges? Exchanges where we can share and trade data, where we can truly get the advantages out of AI. I'm seeing a few nods on the panel. Steve, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm going to hopefully communicate through these comments is to say, anytime we talk about this, can we please be more and more specific, because it matters a lot. It's like saying, I need to hire 3 engineers, and then the question is, what do you mean by engineers? So when we say, can we get different data, or how do we protect data, it matters. If it's an electronic medical record, or if it's where did I choose to buy my most recent coffee. So there's a big difference with data. There are already exchanges. I mean, the SGInnovate is invested in one that is building a model by some profs here in Singapore that are trying to see how an individual could make his or her medical information by consent available for purposes of research. Researchers would go to the platform. They would essentially tokenize some of that information, and there would be a buy and sell relationship by consent. It would be for research, that's the intent. It's not to then sell products to them because it's medically related. But there's a way that you can extend that into lots of different use cases. So we see those now. I don't think that's a future thing. I think the question is going to be getting this idea of informed consent right, but that only happens if we go to the level of specificity when we say, am I giving consent for my data? The answer is, what do you mean by data?
I'm just wondering how that would work, because I'm sure we have many people in this room who are global citizens that roam around the world looking for fintech opportunities, living in different markets, and they have this data, they have their medical records that they want to be able to take with them, or other types of data they want to take with them and get value out of them. How does that, is there a conflict between that and their sort of ownership rights of that data and some of these marketplace systems in line? Anybody have a response to that? Sutapa, your data is at your heart.
I think we need to go back to the earlier comment when I say the real owner of that data is you. It's the citizen, it's the customer, it's the individual. So in a way, whoever we want to give that data to should belong to the real owner. And I think that goes back to how the regulations built around the principle rather than the rule base. Because if that is the principle that everyone adopt, then the open data will become a norm, a global norm, whereby if I leave my digital footprint in Singapore, or if I leave my digital footprint in Switzerland, I can always open that to be shared by anybody. And I think for the advancement of AI, one single key secret ingredient is data. And the data is not the sum of all parts. The benefit of data is when everybody see different views and make sure that we can offer the full use of that synchronized offering, the synchronized effort. And having said that, I think the current rule does not allow that to happen so much. And I think as a consumer, this would be something that the national level should hear you and should work on that together.
Excellent, thank you. We've talked about a number of the challenges. We could probably talk for the rest of the day about some challenges, because it's quite difficult to overcome some of these challenges. But maybe I just want to take a quick sort of litmus test of my panel here today to see, how far are we away from overcoming some of these challenges? Will we overcome these challenges in the next 5 years, 10 years, in terms of getting regulation right to be able to support the innovation of companies and their AI initiatives and what they want to get out of it? Do you think we're generally heading in the right direction? We're going to get there in the next 5 years, 10 years? Anybody disagree? Steve?
At the risk of repeating what I said, I think it depends on the question. So will Singapore get it right? Does Canada have it right? I mean, PM Trudeau was addressing a group last night in which he said we have 2 choices. We can either accept the reality that AI is here and is continuing to spread, and we can pretend like it's not and hope that things will be reasonably okay, or we can embrace it and say, how can we make the best of it? Let's run toward it, so to speak. And when there's challenges, let's work on those. When there's inevitably disruption in societal fabric, when certain roles are eliminated, when there are displacements, when education has changed, how do we deal with those in a positive way? So I'm not fear-mongering or scaremongering. I'm trying to be transparent that these things are not trivial. And so the idea that it will all be okay is one approach. Or what are the things that we do need to work on? What do we think about sharing of data? What are the benefits? We've all made trades in terms of giving away data in exchange for convenience, in terms of deliveries and so on. What would that trade be for advancement in medical care? Because nobody likes to share medical information. That's a much harder question to tackle. So if we keep talking about these things, then we'll make progress. But if we sort of leave them on the, that sounds like a tough problem, hopefully somebody will solve that, then I'm less optimistic that we'll make progress. I think it's that grasping the nettle, grabbing the hard problem and trying to work it through, even though it's uncomfortable, is really where we need to be at as people, as humanity, not as Singapore, not as ASEAN, but as people.
I think, yes, Sutapa.
I would like to just add quickly, I know that we are short on time, but in terms of the technology side that protect the privacy of the data, even if the open data sharing architecture is out there, I think technology is advanced enough to protect that. We can select on the, the suite of technologies available, and it's getting more and more advanced nowadays. It's the matter of business decision. It's a matter of sovereignty decisions on the data sharing. And I think it needs to be done through diplomacy, it needs to be done through trade negotiation rather than asking whether we have the technology to protect the privacy, to make sure that the authentication is correct, or to make sure that the proper authorization is enforced. I think those are not the problem now.
Excellent, thank you. Steve, you mentioned we need to work together to solve some of these problems. And partnerships is obviously a key way of doing that, whether that's partnerships between companies and government, between established banks and startups, like many of you here in this room, and I'm sure many of you have come to the Singapore Fintech Festival to try and set up partnerships with other like-minded firms to solve some of these challenges and these get a hold of some of these opportunities. So let's just explore this partnerships idea a little bit to get a bit of color into some of the partnerships that you might be working within your organizations to develop some of your AI initiatives. Campbell, you were talking a little bit earlier about Data Republic. Can you give us some stories about that, some light into what you've been doing there?
Well, like many companies, we have a lot of data and we have a lot of business issues that we want to use data to solve, but we don't necessarily have the in-house expertise, and it's foolish to think that we'll ever have all of the expertise that we need. So partnerships are not even a choice, they're a necessity. And so whether it's a platform to enable us to securely exchange data that respects customer privacy, or it's getting capabilities to build chatbots, or it's virtual reality or facial recognition or natural language processing to deal with customer feedback and route that and respond to it efficiently. All of these require partnership. And so it's not even a question for me.
Interesting, and I mean, again, Narendra Modi this morning announced they launched this new API exchange as a way of essentially creating a platform to build partnerships between banks and startups and various different types of partners within these partnerships. So really solid, constructive sort of formats being created to facilitate these partnerships. What about yourself, Samuel? Some examples of partnerships for OCBC?
Yes, there are two levels of partnership. The private-public partnership, where we work with the government authorities, and private-private partnerships. It's very important to us to have partnerships because the internal knowledge, the internal intelligence can nowhere be compared with the collective wisdom and collective intelligence outside of our organization. So we very much welcome partnerships. To quote you a few examples, we partnered up with government agencies in order to do gyro for the inland revenue payments. We partner up with CPF, have an API to connect up with them. So these are the partnerships which facilitates our citizens here to be able to communicate through the bank with the government departments in terms of payments are concerned. That's a partnership. I can also think of where the banks can make use of their customer data with respect to facial recognitions in order to work with the government authorities so that we'll be able to work with companies like with entities like MyInfo to help the customer to facilitate their transactions and their account opening with the bank much faster. So that's one level of partnership. The second level of partnership, which is more interesting to the groups over here, is that we work extensively with external partners to develop solutions for us. Over the past 2 years, we have contacted 1,500 fintech companies to develop ideas for us. We submit problem statements to them, and they come up with solutions. And we ultimately, every year, we will work with 10 to 15 companies to allow them to come into the sandbox and work on the real data. On the artificial intelligence side, we also work with companies from the outside to develop, for example, I mentioned to you, predictive behavior, pattern identification. These are all very useful for our business. So to me, partnerships is very important because the knowledge outside of our bank will be much more extensive than it's inside the bank. And you have more experience with different industries, which in the future, banking will have to work with other industries to further penetrate market, to create that convenience for the customers outside of the bank. And your knowledge about the other industries will dovetail very well with the banking industry's knowledge. You combine them into one, and we can truly make use of the customer franchise we have in-house to connecting to the other services that are available outside.
There's no doubting the value of partnerships when they work and they're effective, because obviously both sides of that equation can bring really useful skills, expertise, technology to the partnerships. But you know, it's not all roses. Sometimes it can be a challenge. I interviewed not too long ago Brett King, who was the CEO of Movement Bank, which is a New York-based fintech, talking about some of the challenges he had when he was trying to set up a partnership with some other banks, because he was really worried that if one side of the equation operated in a much different way to the sort of his side, the fintech side, if one was a lot slower than him, it could essentially cripple them as an organization, and they would never get a product to market. So he spent a lot of time evaluating, screening, understanding who the other partner was to decide who is the best person to get into bed with, shall we say. Do you have a view on that, Steve? I think part of your role is to help, not the getting into bed bit, but part of your role is to help facilitate some of these partnerships between some of your firms within SGInnovate and outside.
Yes, I mean, our prime focus is helping people form and start to build a company. So partnerships are difficult for many of our teams because they're so early stage that for them to bring something, especially when you're talking about deep tech, which is what we talk about based on science. So if you're talking about something to do with artificial intelligence or nanosatellites or autonomous vehicles, we have lots of different discussions, but partnerships are a little bit more complicated. What we tend to do is partner with other governments. So we just had an event on Monday this week with the Netherlands in which we talk about areas that they're building in and we're building in. We've got an event tomorrow night with the Canadians in which we're talking about what they're building and what we're building. So we tend to think about partnerships, at least in our world, as areas of like-minded individuals, investors, entrepreneurs, academics, corporates, at an ecosystem scale, so it tends to be more country-oriented than individual corporates at this stage of what we do.
Sutapa, any partnerships that you're involved in the moment?
I think it's pretty much fall into the categories that you mentioned before. Clearly, the public and citizens partnership is extremely important. You see a lot more and more open data source coming from the government side that's fully secured, fully anonymized. I think that would be the investment that we start to see going forward in a lot of the ASEAN countries. clearly the public to public, private to private partnership is a natural way. It has happened before, but AI just sort of give that activity the explosion that it needs for a long time. I would like to I would like to mention another type of partnerships that we have started to see more and more is partnership among the technology communities. And that partnership is based on the open source, the share idea, and the share viewed. And I think that's very healthy. It's moved beyond who gets what. The partnership itself suggests, the word itself suggests exclusivity. But this one is open to all, and we start to see that more among the tech citizens in the community, within the country, outside the countries, among the academia. So I think that's extremely. It's a clear pointer of where the society is moving. That direction is more shared.
Excellent, thank you. We've only got about 5 minutes left, I'm afraid. So I'm just going to push to a question now, which leads on to our next section, which is around the potential for AI. And this may be a question you may not be expecting, but let me push this up on screen if I can. So the question is, with so much attention on AI, is there fear that one day AI will evolve beyond human control? This sort of dystopian view of artificial intelligence in the world with the rise of the robots, etc. We've got 3 minutes 50 to talk about this. Does anybody have a view on this? Is it going to get out of our control? Campbell, we're not going to have planes going crazy in the future?
This question is beyond my pay grade, I'm sorry.
I cannot, I actually do not know the answer, but I think AI at the present time can probably do intelligent judgment calls and execute based on first level, second level, third level, fourth level derivatives. Meaning that you build your decision on the first level of information, and you build on the combination of information, you make another level of information, and you make decision based on that. That's first, second, third, and fourth. I think the human brain is much more versatile than building derivative beyond the third and the fourth level. I think the human brain goes probably 20, 30 levels of derivative judgment calls based on the derivative information that they've obtained. So where I think it's conceptually possible, it is not something that I would expect to happen very soon.
Excellent. Anybody else want to add in a final thought on that one?
Well,
Steve?
for those that know Li Kai-fu, former head of Google China and a well-known speaker on this topic, his perspective is the risk to humanity from AI is more around the social displacement than it is around this idea of, a singularity in which the machines run amok. So I think the risk is real, but I think we need to understand what we mean by the risk, and it's more about how we relate to each other and what does it do to social contracts than this idea of automation run amok.
Excellent, I couldn't agree more. Before I wrap up, any final comments from our panel here today on AI? Anything we haven't covered, anything you would like to add?
I think I would just like to repeat perhaps the earlier call for some transnational synchronization in regulation, in partnerships, in the way we deal with a person's right to data. It's all very well if you're operating in one regulatory jurisdiction, but as an airline, and there are many other industries where we touch multiple countries in the same journey, the same transaction. And this fragmentation is not helping the art and application of AI, neither is it helping business, neither is it helping the individual consumer. There really needs to be a stronger transnational discussion about how we can take this forward.
That's a really good point, and actually it was about a year to the day that I was sitting on just about this same slide, or it may have been the Deloitte stage, talking about ASEAN integration, and we had a panel here talking about this to try and get to the bottom of when will ASEAN be integrated in terms of regulation and other factors like this. Well, the first takeaway was that everyone would like it to happen. The second takeaway was that they didn't see it happening in the near future. It was just too difficult, this sort of pipe dream of ASEAN integration. But maybe conversations like this, talking about partnerships and the role they can play in helping to break down those challenges of artificial intelligence, talking about the opportunities, talking about data flows can help spur that discussion and move it forward. So we are out of time. I would like to thank everybody. I'd like to specifically thank our fantastic panel here today. Could you all join me in giving a round of applause?